The mop bucket overturned at exactly 1147 p.m., spilling grey water across the marble floor of the executive lobby like a small, miserable flood. Elias Wen caught the handle before it clattered against the wall. His left hand moved faster than his thoughts, fingers closing around cheap plastic, while his right arm instinctively blocked the narrow gap beneath the reception desk. A moment later, a small shoe disappeared farther into the shadow under the counter. The child hiding there did not make a sound. Across the lobby, the night security guard lowered his phone and frowned. What was that? Nothing. Elias bent at once. His voice flat from exhaustion rather than fear. The wheel caught on the mat. He kept his head lowered as he dragged the bucket upright. Water soaked through the knees of his faded uniform trousers. The cleaning company's logo had peeled at the corners from too many washes, and one sleeve was a shade paler than the other. Beneath the lobby's chandelier, every sign of poverty became sharper, less forgivable. The marble had veins of pale gold. Elias's hands had cracks. The guard stared for a few seconds, then returned to his phone. Clean it fast. The executive elevator's still active tonight. I know. Elias did not look toward the desk again until the guard's attention drifted away. Then he tapped twice against the side panel with the back of his knuckle. A whisper came from below. I didn't move. I know. His voice softened only by a fraction. Stay there. Noah. It's cold. Elias paused with the wet cloth in his hand. The lobby air conditioning was always too severe after midnight. Kept at a temperature meant for expensive suits and fresh flowers, rather than a 6-year-old boy curled under furniture. He wanted to tell Noah to come out. He wanted to wrap the child in the thin jacket folded at the bottom of the cleaning cart. But the cameras above the reception desk had red lights like watchful eyes. And the Lian corporate tower did not forgive violations of policy. Employees were replaceable, janitors even more so. Count the lights on the ceiling. Elias said quietly, when you reach 50, count again. Noah obeyed. He always obeyed when Elias's voice sounded like that. The executive lobby occupied the top private access floor of Lian Global Holdings. Though Elias had never seen the offices above, except through open doors and reflections in polished glass, this was a place where silence had weight. Even the orchids arranged near the elevators seemed expensive enough to judge him. At night, the tower changed character. The daytime crowd vanished, leaving behind security doors, dimmed hallways, and the faint mechanical breath of central air. Elias preferred it that way. Empty buildings asked fewer questions. He wrung the cloth until dirty water ran between his fingers. At midnight, he still had the west corridor, the conference lounge, and the private washrooms to finish. After that, he would carry Noah down through the service elevator before the early finance team arrived. They would take the last night bus home. If Noah slept on the ride, Elias could hold him with one arm and use the other to count the remaining coins in his pocket. A poor person's life was measured in small calculations. How much milk could be watered down before a child noticed? How many fever patches could be cut in half? How many lies were needed to turn hunger into a game? Under the desk, Noah began counting in a whisper too soft for anyone else to hear. Elias wiped the floor clean. He had just pushed the cart toward the corridor when the private elevator chimed. The sound was quiet, almost elegant, yet it struck him harder than an alarm. Elias's spine stiffened. The security guard also stood straighter, quickly slipping his phone into his pocket. The elevator doors opened without hurry, revealing 3 men in dark suits. 2 were assistants. The one in front did not need introduction. Adrian Lian stepped into the lobby with the detached calm of someone who had never been denied entry anywhere in his life. Elias had seen him from a distance before, mostly on screens in the building lobby or printed in financial magazines abandoned in waiting areas. Those images had made him look cold, handsome, untouchable in the way old money tried to appear natural. In person, the effect was worse. Adrian's black coat was unbuttoned over a charcoal suit, rain still clinging to the shoulders in fine silver specks. His features held no softness at first glance, only restraint carved into bone. He did not look around like a visitor. He looked as if the building had merely been waiting for him to return. For one foolish second, Elias forgot to breathe. Then memory cut through him, sharp and old. A banquet hall blurred by heat. Rain against glass. A hand fastening a necklace at the base of his throat. A voice, low and controlled, asking him if he was cold. The scent of cedar and bitter orange pressing into his lungs until the world tilted. Elias lowered his head before Adrian's gaze could reach his face. "Mr. Lien." The security guard greeted, almost bowing. Adrian gave a faint nod. His eyes moved over the lobby, taking in the overturned bucket, the damp floor, the cleaning cart, and finally Elias. The pause lasted less than a second. Elias felt it anyway. "Why is the executive lobby still wet?" one assistant asked. Displeased. "My mistake," Elias said. "I'll finish immediately." The assistant glanced at his name tag. Elias Wen. This floor should have been completed before 11:30. Yes. That wasn't an answer. Elias gripped the mop handle, his nails pressed into his palm through the thin gloves. It will not happen again. He did not defend himself. Defense wasted time and invited attention. In 6 years, he had learned that poverty made every explanation sound like an excuse. Better to be quiet. Better to become part of the floor, the wall. The air people forgot they were breathing. Adrian said nothing. That was somehow worse. The group began crossing the lobby toward the conference wing. Elias turned the cart slightly, blocking the reception desk from view. His heart had become a dull, steady impact against his ribs. Noah remained hidden. Good boy, Elias thought, though guilt immediately followed. A child should not have to be good like prey staying still beneath branches. The assistant passed first, then the second. Adrian passed last. For a breath, the scent reached Elias. Cheddar, bitter, orange, rain. His fingers almost slipped from the mop handle. Adrian stopped. Elias felt the air change before he understood why. The Alpha's presence sharpened, not through movement, but through attention. It was like standing beneath a blade suspended by a thread. Slowly, Adrian turned his head toward him. "Have we met?" Adrian asked. The lobby became too quiet. Elias kept his face lowered. 6 years had changed him. His hair was shorter now, cut at home with dull scissors. His cheeks were thinner. The softness of youth had been replaced by the pale restraint of someone who slept lightly and woke often. He wore a mask too ordinary for memory to hold. "No, sir." Adrian did not answer at once. Elias could feel him studying the side of his face, the slope of his neck above the worn collar, the faint tremor he could not quite suppress. The assistant beside Adrian said carefully, "Mr. Lian." Only then did Adrian look away. "Continue." They walked toward the conference wing. Elias waited until their footsteps faded behind glass doors before he allowed himself one breath. It came out unsteadily, almost silent. He pushed the cart behind the reception desk and crouched. Noah was curled in the narrow space with both arms around his knees. His face was pale, but he did not cry. Around his neck, under the collar of his school sweater, a thin silver chain had slipped free. The pendant rested against his chest, a small crescent-shaped piece of metal, simple but unmistakably custom-made, its inner curve engraved with a pattern of tiny lines like falling rain. Elias's hand closed around it at once. Noah blinked. Daddy, hide this. Elias tucked the pendant back beneath the sweater. Fingers colder than the necklace. Never let it show here. I forgot. I know. He forced his voice to remain gentle. It's okay. Was that the scary boss? Elias looked toward the glass corridor where Adrian had disappeared. The reflection of the lobby showed only his own crouched figure and Noah's small face peering out from shadow. Yes. Noah considered this with the solemnity of a child who had learned too early that adults were not all safe. He smelled like the necklace. Elias's hand froze. What? Noah touched his collar, like when it rains on trees. For a moment, the marble floor beneath Elias seemed to tilt. He steadied himself with one hand on the desk. Noah had never met Adrian. Elias had made certain of it. Yet blood had its own cruel memory. Scent. Inheritance. Instinct, things Elias had spent 6 years trying to outrun, were quietly waking inside his son. Don't say that again. Elias whispered. Noah's eyes widened. Regret struck immediately. Elias reached out and smoothed the child's hair. His palm, lingering too long. I'm not angry. Just remember. Some things are only for us. Noah nodded, though confusion remained in his gaze. Elias helped him out from under the desk only after checking the cameras. The blind spot lasted 7 seconds when the rotating lens shifted toward the elevator bank. He had timed it weeks ago. Noah slipped behind the cleaning cart and followed him into the west corridor like a small shadow. The rest of the work passed in fragments. Mop strokes, reflections, glass doors, the ache in his back. Noah sitting inside the supply closet with a picture book too worn to have corners. Every time the building made a sound, Elias's pulse jumped. He hated himself for it. Fear was useful when it kept a person alive, but exhausting when it had nowhere to go. At dois trezet shishas, Elias entered the executive washroom. The space was larger than the room he and Noah rented. A wall of dark stone held 3 sinks with motion sensors. A vase of white lilies stood beside rolled hand towels no one seemed to use. Elias worked quickly, replacing trash liners and wiping the counters. In the mirror, his own reflection watched him with hollow eyes. He almost did not notice the figure at the door. Adrian stood there alone. Elias turned too fast. The spray bottle slipped from his hand and hit the floor. Mr. Lian. Adrian's gaze dropped to the bottle, then returned to him. You're nervous? No. Sir. That was not a question. Elias bent to retrieve the bottle. I apologize if my work disturbed you. You apologize easily. It is part of the job. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not softness. Not yet. Perhaps recognition of a locked door, or irritation at finding no handle. He stepped inside, and the washroom seemed smaller despite its size. Elias moved back by instinct, leaving the cleaning cart between them. Adrian noticed. Do I frighten you? Elias's throat tightened. 6 years ago, the answer would have been different. 6 years ago, Adrian's presence had been a storm he did not know how to name. Now fear had become practical. Adrian was not merely a man from the past. He was money, bloodline, lawyers, family name. He was every force that could take a child from an Omega who had nothing except love and a forged calm. No, Elias said. Adrian watched him for a long moment. You lie carefully. Elias met his eyes for the first time. It was a mistake. Adrian's eyes were darker than he remembered. Not black, but close enough to hold light without reflecting it kindly. Elias saw fatigue there, and calculation, and something buried so deeply it might once have been grief. The sight made his chest hurt in a way anger could not explain. He looked away first. I have work to finish. So late. My shift ends at 1. You have a child waiting in the building. The world narrowed. Elias's hand tightened around the spray bottle until the plastic creaked. He had prepared for many dangers: security, supervisors, illness, hunger, eviction. He had not prepared for Adrian saying the word child in that flat. Certain voice. My nephew. Elias said. Adrian took one step closer. Your nephew? Yes. What is his name? Elias hesitated, half a breath too long. Noah. When? Yes. The security cameras did not record him entering with you. Elias's blood went cold. He should have known. Of course, Adrian could access anything in this building. Of course, a man like him did not need to raise his voice to become dangerous. He came earlier with another worker. Elias said. His mother. Elias. His name sounded different in Adrian's mouth. Not familiar. Exactly. But the syllables landed with terrible precision, as if Adrian had been testing them against a memory and found the edges aligned. Elias could not move. Adrian's gaze lowered. Not to his uniform, but to his collarbone. For one irrational second, Elias felt again the cool touch of silver against his skin. He had stopped wearing the necklace after Noah was born. Not because he hated it, because he had loved it once, and love had become unaffordable. Where is the child now? Adrian asked. Safe. That wasn't my question. It is my answer. Silence followed. The air between them should have belonged to hierarchy, CEO and janitor, alpha and omega, power and dependence. Yet for the first time that night, Adrian looked almost caught off guard. Elias had spoken quietly, but there had been iron beneath it. Poverty had bent him many times. It had not taught him how to surrender Noah. From somewhere down the corridor came the soft scrape of a door. Elias turned. Noah stood at the entrance of the washroom, rubbing one eye with the back of his hand. Sleep had loosened his caution. His sweater collar had slipped sideways, and beneath the white light, the silver pendant lay fully visible against his chest. Adrian went completely still. The stillness was worse than shock. It was absolute, controlled, and bloodless, his gaze fixed on the pendant, then on Noah's face. Noah stared back, small and solemn, with Adrian's dark eyes and Elias's mouth. The two inheritances joined so plainly that the lie between the adults seemed almost obscene. Elias moved first. He crossed the room and pulled Noah behind him. Go back to the closet, he said, too softly for anyone but the child. Noah did not move. His attention remained on Adrian. Children sensed danger differently from adults. Sometimes they mistook it for sadness. Adrian's voice, when it came, was lower than before. Come here. No. Elias answered before Noah could. Adrian looked at him. I wasn't speaking to you. I know. The faintest fracture appeared in Adrian's composure. You are an employee in my building hiding an undocumented child during a restricted night shift. Choose your next words carefully. Elias should have bowed his head. He should have apologized, begged, invented another story. Instead, he felt Noah's fingers clutch the back of his uniform, and something inside him became very calm. Then fire me, he said. Noah's fingers tightened. Adrian's eyes darkened. The corridor lights hummed above them. The lilies on the counter gave off a clean, expensive scent that made Elias feel faintly sick. Everything in this room belonged to Adrian, the stone, the glass, the silence, the authority, everything except the child behind Elias's back. Adrian's gaze returned to the necklace. That pendant, he said. Where did he get it? Elias did not answer. The question did not sound like curiosity. It sounded like a door opening inside a locked house. Adrian took another step forward. Slowly this time, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bite, Elias stepped back with Noah. But there was nowhere far enough to go. I asked you a question. It was bought second-hand. No. Elias's mouth went dry. Adrian's eyes lifted to his. For the first time, the coldness there burned. That necklace was never sold. Noah shifted behind Elias. Confused by the tension but silent, the pendant caught the light again, flashing like a small piece of moon dragged up from dark water. Adrian looked at it as though seeing not silver, but 6 lost years made visible. Elias could hear his own heartbeat. Adrian said, each word controlled with frightening care, "Where did that child get this necklace?" "Second-hand," Elias said. The word left his mouth with the steadiness of a man stepping onto thin ice and deciding not to look down. Noah stood behind him, small fingers buried in the back of his uniform, while Adrian Leon watched them both with the silence of someone who had already heard the lie and was only waiting to see how far it would go. "In the old district," Elias added, "there are stalls near the underpass. People sell jewelry there." Adrian's expression did not change. That necklace was custom-made. Then someone must have sold it. No one had the right to sell it. For a moment, the washroom seemed to hold its breath. Elias could feel Noah's confusion pressing against his back, feel the child's warm forehead through the thin fabric when he leaned closer. The pendant lay exposed beneath the hard white light. Innocent in the way objects were innocent. Cruel in the way they survived everything people tried to bury. Elias reached back without looking and tucked the necklace under Noah's sweater. "Rich people lose things too, Mr. Leon." Adrian's eyes lifted from the child to him. The faintest movement passed through his face. Not anger, but something more dangerous, attention sharpening around pain. "You speak as if you know." "I clean after them every night." The answer was humble enough to be safe, pointed enough to be a warning. One of Adrian's assistants appeared at the corridor entrance then, stopping abruptly when he saw the scene inside the executive washroom, the CEO standing opposite a janitor, a child half hidden behind the janitor's legs, and a silence too private to enter. Adrian did not turn. He simply raised one hand, and the assistant withdrew as if a door had closed in his face. "Your shift is over," Adrian said. Elias's first instinct was terror. Over meant dismissed. Over meant security escort. Unpaid wages. His name blacklisted among cleaning contractors that all fed from the same corporate mouths. He had survived 6 years by imagining disasters before they arrived. And in the space between Adrian's words and the next breath, every possible ruin presented itself with sickening clarity. "I haven't finished the West Corridor. Someone else will finish it. Mr. Leon, take the child home." Elias stared at him despite himself. Adrian had not said it kindly. He said it as an order, flat and impossible to refuse. Yet he had also not called security. He had not demanded Noah's identification. He had not pulled the necklace from the child's throat and dragged the past into the light. Elias distrusted mercy more than cruelty. Cruelty was straightforward. Mercy always asked to be repaid. Noah's hand slipped into his. Elias bowed his head. "Thank you." Adrian's gaze remained on the place where the pendant had vanished beneath the sweater. "Report to the administrative office at 9 tomorrow morning." Elias's fingers tightened around Noah's. "Am I being fired?" "If I intended to fire you," Adrian said, "you would not need to ask." The answer should have comforted no one. It certainly did not comfort Elias. He collected his cleaning cart with controlled movements, returned the spray bottle to its place, and guided Noah into the corridor without turning his back fully to Adrian until he had no choice. He felt the alpha's gaze follow them all the way to the service elevator. Only when the doors closed did Noah release the breath he had been holding. "Daddy," Noah whispered, "did I do something bad?" The question cut more deeply than accusation would have. Elias crouched in front of him as the elevator descended through the sleeping tower. The fluorescent light made Noah's face look too pale, too young, too much like the child he was never allowed to be. Elias touched his cheek with the back of his hand, careful of the cracked skin near his knuckles. "No," he said, "you did nothing wrong." Then why was he angry? Elias looked at their reflections in the elevator doors, a thin omega in a stained uniform. A child with expensive blood and second-hand shoes. He had no answer that would not poison something in Noah. After a long silence, he only pulled the sweater collar higher. "Some adults are angry before children are even born," he said. Noah did not understand. That was a mercy Elias could still afford. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the city rinsed and cold beneath a grey sky. Their rented room smelled faintly of damp walls and boiled rice. Elias slept for 2 hours in a chair because the bed belonged to Noah when the child was feverish, and Noah had been warm through the night. Not sick enough for a clinic, but warm enough to keep Elias awake, counting every breath. At 8:20, he tied the necklace under Noah's shirt with a length of thread so it could not slip free again. "You don't have to wear it," Elias said, though even as he spoke, his hand lingered over the pendant. Noah held it through the fabric. "You said it keeps me safe." Elias closed his eyes briefly. He had said many things when Noah was younger and asked why they had no family, why other children had grandparents at school gates, why he was never allowed to answer questions about his other parent. He had said the necklace was a charm. He had said it came from someone who once saved him in the rain. He had said it belonged to the past. And because children believed stories before they learned the shape of lies, Noah had cherished it. "It does," Elias said at last, "but only if no one sees it." At 9, he stood in the administrative office on the 22nd floor. Hands folded in front of him while Noah waited outside with a coloring book and a bun wrapped in paper. The supervisor of contracted sanitation staff did not look pleased. A woman from Human Resources sat beside him. On the opposite side of the table, Adrian's chief assistant, Mira Vale, opened a folder. "Mr. Venn," Mira said, her voice professional enough to reveal nothing. "Last night you brought an unauthorized minor into a restricted corporate area." "Yes. This is grounds for immediate termination." "I understand. However, Mr. Leanne has decided not to pursue disciplinary dismissal at this time." Elias's eyes flickered once. He kept the rest of his face still. The supervisor looked as if he had swallowed something bitter. "You will be reassigned to the executive maintenance rotation for the next 2 weeks. Day and evening overlap. No night-only access. Any further violation will result in termination without severance." The words slid through Elias slowly. Executive maintenance meant more cameras, more staff, more chances for Noah to be seen. It also meant Adrian's floor. He understood then that it was not punishment in the ordinary sense. It was containment. Mira turned a page. "Mr. Leanne has also authorized a temporary childcare stipend through employee hardship assistance." "No," Elias said. Both the supervisor and the HR woman looked up. Mira studied him with more curiosity than offense. "You are refusing assistance." "Yes." "It does not require repayment." I said no. The supervisor snapped. "Do you think this is a negotiation? You brought a child into restricted areas because you couldn't arrange care. The company is offering a solution." Elias lowered his gaze. "I will arrange care myself." Mira did not press. She only closed the folder and said, "Then you will sign the refusal form." he signed. The pen was too smooth. The paper too white. His signature looked like something written by a stranger. Outside, Noah had drawn a building with many windows and a tiny figure beside it holding a mop. When Elias saw the picture, he folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket as if it were a document capable of saving them. Adrian heard about the refusal 10 minutes later. He stood before the glass wall of his office. The city spread below him in wet steel and pale morning light. Mira placed the signed form on his desk and waited without comment. She had worked for him for 7 years and understood that Adrian's silences were not empty. They were rooms where decisions happened without witnesses. He refused before hearing the conditions Adrian asked. He refused after hearing there were no repayment terms. Adrian did not turn. Of course he did. Mira hesitated. Should I have insisted? No. The answer came too quickly. Mira glanced toward him. Mr. Lian, if this is about the necklace, it is. The honesty surprised her into silence. Adrian finally turned from the window. Last night had not left him. He had slept perhaps an hour. And even then, sleep had been less rest than an old corridor opening in his mind. The child's face. The crescent pendant. Elias Wen's eyes when he said, "Then fire me." None of it arranged itself into a conclusion he could tolerate. Find out when Elias Wen entered the city registry. He said, employment history, medical records, housing permits, school enrollment for the child. Quietly. Mira's expression grew more careful. And if there is no legal basis, then find the absence. She understood him at once. People with ordinary lives left trails. Gaps were sometimes louder than records. By afternoon, the executive floor had become a theater of almost invisible pressure. Elias polished the corridor glass while administrative staff passed with lowered voices. He could feel curiosity collecting around him like dust. No one said openly that the CEO had intervened for a janitor. No one needed to. In corporate towers, information traveled through pauses, glances, elevator rides that ended too soon. Noah sat in a staff break room on the maintenance level under the reluctant supervision of an older cleaner named Ruth. Elias had paid her with half his week's grocery money and a promise to cover her Friday shift. It was not safe. But it was safer than the storage closet. Safety, in Elias's life, had always been comparative. At patrudois prejudice, a stack of supply crates collapsed in the maintenance corridor. The crash echoed through 3 floors. Elias heard it from the executive pantry and ran before anyone called his name. By the time he reached the lower level, several workers had gathered near the service door. Ruth stood pale and shaken. One hand pressed to her chest. Noah was on the floor beside a fallen crate, uninjured except for a scrape on his wrist. But the air around him had changed. It was faint at first, a clean, bright pressure like rain striking cedar leaves. Then every alpha in the corridor went rigid. Noah sat very still, eyes wide with fear, while an instinct too large for his small body trembled around him. He was not attacking. He was defending himself. Yet the pheromone wave that slipped from him was dense, pure, startlingly controlled for a child who had never been trained. A young security officer took one involuntary step back. Elias pushed through the crowd and dropped to his knees. Noah. The pressure vanished almost instantly. Noah threw himself into Elias's arms. Shaking so hard his teeth clicked. Elias held him close. One hand covering the back of his neck where alpha glands would one day mature. His own omega scent, faint from years of suppressants and stress, rose unconsciously in response, softening around the child like worn cloth. Someone whispered, "That kid's an alpha." Another voice answered, lower, "Not just any alpha." Elias lifted his head. Adrian stood at the end of the corridor. No one had noticed his arrival. The crowd parted only after they saw where Elias was looking. Adrian's gaze took in the fallen crates. Noah's scraped wrist. Elias, kneeling on the floor. The remnants of pheromone still thinning in the air. His expression remained controlled, but his hand at his side had curled once before relaxing. "Clear the corridor," he said. The workers scattered with the obedience of people eager not to become involved. Ruth began apologizing, near tears. Adrian did not look at her. "Clinic," he ordered. Elias tightened his arms around Noah. "He's fine. He is bleeding. It's a scrape." He released defensive pheromones, strong enough to trigger 3 adult alphas. Adrian's voice lowered. "That is not fine." Elias stared at him. Behind Adrian's composure, something had shifted. Not accusation this time. Not yet recognition. Either. It was worse concern wearing the clothes of authority. "If you take him to the company clinic," Elias said, "there will be records. There are already witnesses." "No." Adrian stepped closer. "You cannot protect him by pretending nothing happened." "And you can." The question struck the corridor with more force than Elias intended. Ruth looked away. Noah hid his face in Elias's shoulder. Adrian stopped in front of them. Near enough that Elias could see the faint, rain-darkened edge of his coat cuff. He did not answer immediately. "No," Adrian said at last, "not if you keep lying to me." Elias almost laughed. The sound would have been ugly, so he swallowed it. "You are not owed the truth because you became curious." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Is that what you think this is? I think men like you call it curiosity when they have not yet decided whether to call it ownership." For the first time, Adrian looked openly wounded. It lasted less than a second. But Elias saw it and hated that he had. Pain made powerful people unpredictable. Pain also made them human. And Elias could not afford Adrian's humanity. The clinic examination was brief because Elias refused anything beyond disinfectant and a temperature check. The company doctor, a precise man with tired eyes, glanced several times at Noah's scent profile monitor and said nothing until Adrian entered. Elias noticed the silence and understood it immediately. "Mr. Lian," the doctor said carefully. "The child should have a formal alpha development assessment." "No," Elias said. The doctor looked at Adrian instead of him. "His pheromone density is unusual. Rare lineage markers may be involved. If improperly suppressed, he may experience fevers, gland pain, emotional instability." I said no. Noah leaned against Elias, exhausted now, the brief surge having drained him. Adrian stood beside the examination bed without touching either of them. His eyes remained on the child's bandaged wrist. "Leave us," Adrian said. The doctor hesitated, then obeyed. When the door closed, the room held only 3 people and the machinery's soft hum. Elias felt cornered. Adrian seemed to know it. He remained where he was, deliberately keeping distance between them. "I won't force an examination today," Adrian said, generous. "But if he collapses because you are afraid of records, that will not be protection. It will be neglect." Elias went still. Adrian regretted the word the moment it crossed his mouth. He saw it land. Elias's face did not crumple. That would have been easier to forgive. Instead, it emptied. All the guarded anger withdrew behind something colder. In the silence that followed, Noah shifted uneasily and clutched Elias's sleeve. "You know nothing about what I have done to keep him alive," Elias said. The quietness of it was unbearable. Adrian did not apologize. Perhaps he should have. But some men learned repentance later than harm. He only lowered his gaze and said, Then tell me. Elias lifted Noah from the examination bed. No. That night, after Elias left through the service exit with Noah asleep against his shoulder, Adrian remained in the security archive room beneath the tower. The old banquet footage had taken Mira 6 hours to recover from off-site storage. Half of it was damaged by rain interference and a corrupted timestamp. The charity banquet had been 6 years ago, hosted in the West Pavilion before its renovation. Adrian remembered fragments, a drugged heat in his blood, thunder beyond the windows. A slender Omega whose face he could never fully reconstruct after waking to an empty room and a necklace missing from its case. On the screen, the past flickered. There he was, younger by 6 years and less empty around the eyes. Standing near the pavilion terrace, a figure leaned against him, face hidden by wet hair and shadow. Adrian watched his own hand lift, watched the necklace catch the light, watched himself fasten it around the Omega's throat with a care that made his present self go cold. The figure turned slightly. The image tore into static. Adrian played it again, then again. On the 5th replay, the Omega's profile appeared for less than a second. Elias Wen. Behind him, Mira's phone vibrated with the laboratory's preliminary note from the clinic monitor. She read it once, then looked up slowly. "Mr. Lian," she said. Adrian did not turn from the frozen screen. Mira's voice changed. The child's pheromone pattern carries a rare hereditary marker. It matches the Lian paternal line. The room was silent except for the soft, mechanical buzz of the archive server. On the screen, Adrian's younger self stood in the rain, fastening a necklace around the throat of a man he had failed to remember clearly enough to find. Adrian closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 years, the past did not feel lost. It felt accused. By the next morning, the tower had learned to look at Elias Wen without looking directly. It was not open gossip. Lian Global Holdings was too disciplined for that, too proud of its polished surfaces and soundproofed conference rooms. But rumors did not need mouths to live. They moved through the hesitation before someone entered an elevator with him, through the way administrative staff stopped speaking when his cleaning cart turned a corner, through a young analyst glancing at Noah's empty chair in the maintenance break room as if a child had become a corporate threat overnight. Elias kept his head lowered and continued polishing the brass trim along the executive corridor. The work required patience, which helped. Scrub, wipe, breathe. Scrub, wipe. Do not think. In 6 years, he had learned that panic could be postponed if the hands remained busy. The body could be forced into obedience long after the heart had become a trapped animal. Noah was downstairs with Ruth again. Though Elias had tied the necklace beneath his sweater and made him repeat the same instructions 3 times before leaving. Do not run. Do not answer questions about scent. If anyone asks who your father is, say Elias Wen and nothing else. Noah had listened solemnly, then asked whether the scary boss was still angry. Elias had said no. It was not true, but neither was it entirely a lie. Adrian Lian's anger, if that was what lived behind his dark eyes, had changed shape. Since the clinic, Adrian had not confronted him. That silence unsettled Elias more than accusation would have. He saw Adrian twice that morning, once through the glass wall of the central conference room, where the CEO sat among directors in grey suits, and once at the far end of the corridor, speaking quietly to his assistant, Mira. Both times, Adrian's gaze found him with impossible precision. Both times, he looked away first, as though some agreement had been made that Elias had not accepted. Inside the conference room, the Lian family's private directors were discussing quarterly risk exposure. But Celeste Lian was watching her nephew instead of the presentation. Celeste had the kind of elegance that made age irrelevant. Her silver-threaded hair was pinned low at her nape. Her suit was ivory. Severe without being plain. She had helped hold the Liane family together after Adrian's father died, which meant half the board respected her, and the other half feared what respect had cost. She did not waste words, and she did not tolerate sentimental weakness disguised as moral awakening. When the meeting ended, she remained seated until the others had gone. "You dismissed Director Holt too publicly yesterday," she said. Adrian closed the file in front of him. He falsified a facilities report. He embarrassed a contracted worker. That is not the same as embezzlement. It is when the report was meant to justify termination without compensation. Celeste smiled faintly. "You have developed an unusual concern for sanitation staff." Adrian did not answer. He had spent the night reading documents that should have been ordinary and were not. Elias Wett's employment history began too late. His housing registration showed 3 cities in 4 years. Always cheap districts. Always paid in cash. Noah Wen's birth certificate listed only one parent. The hospital file had been sealed through a low-cost legal aid office that no longer existed. There were no relatives. No school photographs before age 4. No visible support network. Not emptiness. Evasion. Celeste placed one manicured hand on the conference table. "There is a rumor," she said. "A child released alpha pheromones in the maintenance corridor." Adrian's eyes cooled. Many children present early. Not like this. Her smile disappeared. "You know that. And so do I." The room's glass walls reflected the city in pale layers behind her. Adrian looked at those reflections rather than at his aunt. He knew Celeste's mind. To her, family was not warmth, it was structure. Bloodline was not affection, it was continuity. If Noah's scent had reached her ears, then the danger had already begun moving through channels older than the company itself. "You will not involve yourself," Adrian said. Celeste leaned back. That sounded like an order. It was. For a brief second, something maternal and tired passed over her face. It vanished before it could soften anything. "You are not your father. Adrian, do not make the mistake of believing restraint and weakness are different only because you prefer one word over the other. My father confused cruelty with leadership, and still left you an empire large enough to criticize him from." The words should have struck. Adrian let them pass. His attention had shifted beyond the glass wall, where Elias was kneeling by the corridor baseboard. Sleeves pushed up, wrist bones visible beneath pale skin. The Omega did not look toward the conference room. He cleaned as if survival could be achieved through spotless corners. Celeste followed his gaze. Her expression became unreadable. "At doi, obsprezecher, The accusation arrived. Elias had just finished emptying the executive lounge bins when 2 internal security officers entered with the facilities supervisor behind them. The supervisor's face had arranged itself into grave disappointment, the kind that looked practiced in mirrors. Elias knew before anyone spoke that a trap had closed somewhere near his feet. "Elias Wen," one officer said. "Step away from the cart." The employees in the lounge turned slowly. A legal associate paused with a coffee cup halfway to her mouth. Elias did not move at first. Not because he intended defiance, but because Noah's drawing was still folded in his back pocket and the sudden fear that someone might take even that left him strangely numb. "What happened?" he asked. "Confidential materials were removed from conference room A after the board session. We received a report that your cart entered the restricted corridor during that window. My cart was outside the pantry. Step away." He did. The officer opened the lower compartment of the cleaning cart and removed a sealed blue folder from behind a stack of trash liners. The Liane watermark was visible even from across the room. A soft breath moved through the watching staff. Elias stared at the folder without recognition, then looked at the supervisor. The supervisor's mouth tightened, not in triumph, but in relief. That was when Elias understood, not who had placed it. Perhaps. But why? If the company fired him for theft, no one would ask why Adrian had protected him. No one would ask about Noah. A poor Omega accused of stealing documents would disappear neatly from the building's memory. Those aren't mine, Elias said. The security officer's expression did not change. You can explain downstairs. A hand closed around Elias's arm. He did not struggle. Struggling made poor people look guilty. He only glanced once toward the service corridor, where Ruth would be waiting with Noah when her shift ended. If Elias did not return, Ruth would panic. Noah would wait. Then perhaps someone would question him, and a frightened child might say the wrong thing. Before the officer could pull him forward, the lounge doors opened. Adrian entered alone. The effect was immediate. Conversations died. The security officer released Elias's arm so quickly it seemed almost accidental. Adrian did not look angry, which frightened the room more than anger would have. He looked composed in the way a blade was composed before it touched skin. Who authorized this search, he asked. The supervisor stepped forward. Mr. Lian. I did. After receiving a report. From whom? The supervisor faltered. An anonymous internal source. Convenient. One officer tried to speak. The folder was recovered from his assigned cart. Sir. Adrian finally looked at Elias. Their eyes met for a second. Elias expected suspicion. He braced for it. Instead, Adrian's gaze lowered to the place where the officer had gripped his sleeve, as if the mark left in cheap fabric mattered. Then Adrian turned back to the room. Conference room A has 4 entrance cameras, 2 corridor cameras, and a cleaning access log. Mr. Wen's badge did not enter the room after the board session. The folder was placed in his cart at 153 p.m. by someone wearing a facilities jacket and carrying a supervisor-level keycard. The supervisor's face drained. Adrian took one step closer. Should I continue? Or would you prefer to resign before I mention that your personal account received a transfer from a shell vendor used by Director Holt? The lounge became so silent the ice machine behind the bar sounded loud. Elias stood very still. Public humiliation often had a smell, sweat, expensive perfume turning sour, fear rising from people who had believed themselves safe. The supervisor opened his mouth twice but produced nothing. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He dismantled the man with facts, laid one beside another like surgical instruments. Escort him to legal, Adrian said. Not Mr. Ven. The security officers obeyed at once. When the doors closed behind them, the remaining staff looked at Elias with something worse than contempt curiosity mixed with calculation. Adrian had protected him in public. That protection would not make Elias safer. It would make him visible. Everyone returned to work. Adrian said, They did. Elias reached for the cart handle, needing something solid beneath his hand. Adrian approached only after the lounge emptied. For several seconds, neither spoke. The blue folder lay on the counter between them, a dead thing no one wanted to touch. You knew, Elias said. I suspected. You let it happen. Adrian's face tightened. I let them expose themselves. And if they had taken me before you arrived, they wouldn't have. The certainty should have reassured him. It did not. Elias gave a tired, almost soundless laugh. You really don't understand how frightening that is. Adrian looked at him then, fully. Being protected, being watched closely enough that protection arrives on time. The words struck their mark. Adrian's expression shifted, not into guilt, but toward it. Elias turned away before he could see more. Gratitude was dangerous when it came mixed with resentment. He could not afford to owe Adrian anything, especially not his dignity. I asked for distance. Elias said, "No." Adrian replied quietly, "You asked to be left alone with enemies already moving around you. Those enemies came because of you." He expected denial. Adrian gave none. That silence was somehow more difficult. Before either man could continue, Elias's phone vibrated in his pocket. Ruth's name flashed on the cracked screen. He answered at once, and the first sound he heard was Noah crying weakly in the background. "Elias," Ruth said, breathless. His fever came back. "He keeps saying his neck hurts. I don't know what to do." The phone nearly slipped from Elias's hand. He ran. Adrian followed without being asked. By the time they reached the maintenance level, Noah was curled on a break room sofa, face flushed, small hands pressed to the side of his throat beneath the sweater collar. The air trembled faintly with suppressed alpha pheromones. Unstable now, flickering in painful waves that made the fluorescent lights seem crueler. Ruth stood nearby, wringing her hands. Elias dropped to his knees and pulled Noah against him. "I tried not to smell," Noah whispered. Tears stuck to his lashes. "I remembered." The sentence broke something in Elias's face. "Oh, baby." He pressed his lips to Noah's hair. "You don't have to remember when it hurts." Noah shook against him. His skin was too hot. His scent came in broken pulses, each one sharper than the last. The young body trying to hold back what it had no strength to control. Elias's own omega instincts rose in distress. But years of suppressants had weakened them. He could comfort, not stabilize. He could love, but love did not lower a dangerous fever. Adrian stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. For an instant, no one saw the CEO. They saw only an alpha scent entering the room with impossible restraint. Cedar and rain held at a careful distance. Noah's breathing hitched, then slowed by a fraction. Elias noticed. So did Adrian. "Clinic," Adrian said. Elias did not argue this time. The company emergency unit was on the 8th floor. Private enough to avoid the main lobby, but not private enough to escape surveillance. As the doctor examined Noah, Elias waited outside the glass treatment room, arms wrapped around himself. His uniform sleeve had torn where security grabbed him earlier. He had not noticed until now. The rip exposed the thinness of his wrist. Across the hall, 2 internal security cameras watched with red lights. Elias saw them and understood that Celeste Liane would know by evening. His knees weakened. He sat on the bench. But the motion felt more like falling. The fear he had postponed all day caught up at once the necklace, the bloodline, the accusation, Noah's fever. Adrian's presence beside him like both shelter and storm. He pressed his hands over his face, but he did not cry. Crying required privacy. Something warm settled over his shoulders. Elias lowered his hands. Adrian had taken off his coat and placed it around him. The fabric carried rain, cheddar, and expensive wool. Elias should have pushed it away. Instead, he sat beneath it, too tired to pretend cold did not exist. Adrian stood between him and the cameras, not touching him, not asking forgiveness, simply blocking the view with his body, as if privacy were the first thing he had finally learned how to give. Inside the treatment room, Noah slept under a thin blanket while the doctor prepared the report that would name what everyone had already begun to suspect. At Shaptepatruzech, she Trey P. M. Celeste Liane received the copied medical file in her private residence. She read the genetic marker line twice. Then she placed one call to the family attorney and said, calmly, "Prepare a custody petition. The child is a Liane heir. We will not leave him in the hands of an Omega who has already proven he can disappear. The legal notice arrived in a white envelope so clean it looked obscene in Elias's hands. It was delivered by a man in a dark coat who knew not to step fully into the clinic waiting room. He stopped just beyond the threshold. Offered no introduction beyond the embossed card of a law firm Elias had only ever seen mentioned in business articles, and asked him to confirm his name. Elias did not want to take the envelope. Some instincts were older than reason. A poor Omega learned early that official paper rarely brought rescue. It brought eviction, debt, summons, termination, loss. Noah slept in the treatment room behind glass. An IV taped to the back of his small hand. Adrian's coat still lay over Elias's shoulders, though its warmth had become unbearable. He signed where the courier indicated. The pen shook once between his fingers, then steadied. He had signed hospital waivers alone, rental contracts alone, school forms alone. He knew how to write his name while fear chewed through him. The courier left without looking at Noah. Elias opened the envelope. The first sentence blurred, then sharpened with merciless clarity. Petition for emergency protective custody regarding minor alpha child. Noah Venn, biological heir of the Lian paternal bloodline. His eyes moved down the page, catching phrases like unsafe living conditions, intentional concealment of lineage, medically negligent suppression, unstable employment, unfit guardian. Each phrase had been polished until cruelty looked professional. There was no shouting in the document. No accusation needed to raise its voice when stamped by wealth. At the bottom of the second page was the name of the petitioner, Lian Family Trust. Elias stared at those 3 words until they stopped looking like language. Behind the glass, Noah turned his face slightly on the pillow. His fever had gone down. His cheeks were still flushed, lashes damp against pale skin. He looked impossibly small beneath the clinic blanket. Smaller than any bloodline. Smaller than any family name powerful people could weaponize. Elias pressed the papers together in his fist. The edges bit into his palm. Ruth, who had stayed out of guilt and affection, noticed his face first. Elias. He folded the document once, then again. His movements were precise, almost gentle. Can you watch him for 5 minutes? Of course. But only 5. He walked out before Ruth could ask more. The corridor outside the clinic was too bright. Every polished wall reflected him an Omega in a torn uniform, wearing the CEO's coat like evidence from a crime scene. He reached for the coat and pulled it off his shoulders. The cedar scent clung to his shirt even after the wool left him. By the time he reached the executive floor, the petition had already become a cold stone inside his chest. Adrian's office doors were open. Celeste Lian stood inside, speaking to him with her back to the city view. The glass walls turned their figures into silhouettes Adrian still. Celeste elegant. The distance between them filled with something Elias could not hear, but understood too well. Family, power, decisions made before the people affected were invited to exist. Mira saw Elias first and rose from her desk. Mr. Vin. Elias stepped past her. Adrian turned. For one brief second, relief crossed his face, so quickly hidden that Elias might have doubted it on any other day. Then Adrian saw the folded papers in his hand. Something in the room changed. Celeste did not look surprised. That was enough. Elias placed the petition on Adrian's desk. He did not throw it. He would not give them the satisfaction of making grief look undignified. You said you wouldn't force an examination today. Adrian's gaze dropped to the document. He went utterly still. Celeste folded her hands. Mr. Venn. This is a legal matter. Emotional outbursts will not help your son. My son, Elias said. The words were quiet, But Celeste's mouth tightened. Adrian picked up the document and read the first page. His expression did not change in any visible way. Yet Mira, standing near the door, saw the tendons in his hand rise against the paper. Who authorized this? Celeste answered before anyone else could. I did. Adrian looked at her. You were hesitating, she said. The board will not tolerate hesitation once they understand what that child is. What he is, Elias repeated softly. Celeste finally turned her gaze on him. There was no hatred in it. That somehow made her worse. Hatred might have given him something human to hold. Her eyes held only assessment. A child with that bloodline cannot be raised in a rented room by a night cleaner who smuggles him into restricted corporate property. You may love him. That does not make you capable of protecting his future. Elias felt Adrian's attention move to him. But he did not look. He could not. The petition lay between them like a body on a table. Did you know? Elias asked. Adrian said, No. Celeste sighed faintly, as if they were all making the conversation unnecessarily dramatic. He knew enough to order investigations. He knew enough to test the boy's pheromone profile. Whether he signed this page is irrelevant. The child is Lian blood. Mr. Venn, surely you did not imagine hiding him forever. For 6 years, Elias had imagined many things. A fever he could not afford to treat, a landlord changing locks, a school administrator asking for documents he did not have, Noah presenting early, Noah being taken, Noah learning to hate him for the lies that had kept them alive. But he had not imagined standing in front of Adrian again and realizing that the alpha did not need to betray him deliberately. Carelessness from a man like Adrian was enough. Silence was enough. A half-open door was enough for people like Celeste to walk through. Adrian's voice was low. Elias. Listen to me. Elias flinched at his name. The flinch cut across Adrian's face more sharply than accusation. He stepped from behind the desk, then stopped himself, as if finally understanding that movement could be violence when the other person had nowhere to retreat. I did not allow this, Adrian said, but you made it possible. The sentence landed cleanly. Adrian had no defense, not one that mattered. Celeste watched them both with sudden, narrowed interest. Perhaps she heard what Adrian had not yet been willing to admit. This was not a dispute about custody alone. It was an old wound reopening under fluorescent office light, and all the legal power in the room could not make it bleed neatly. Elias picked up the petition. Noah is still feverish. Do not send anyone to the clinic while I am there. Where are you going? Adrian asked. To my son, Elias. He stopped at the door, but did not turn. Adrian's voice changed. Stripped of command. Give me time. Elias almost laughed. Time. Rich people always asked for time after spending other people's lives. He had given Adrian 6 years without being asked. 6 years in which Noah had learned to sleep through hunger, to hide beneath desks, to answer questions carefully, to smile when Elias split one egg between them and called it a feast. No, Elias said. You had time. He left before Adrian could answer. Adrian did not move until the elevator doors closed around Elias. Then he turned to Celeste. Mira had seen him angry before. She had seen him destroy negotiations with a sentence. Seen senior executives lose color under his silence. This was different. He looked calm in the way the sea looked calm before swallowing a coast. Withdraw it, he said. Celeste lifted one brow. Impossible. Withdraw it. The filing has already been prepared for emergency submission. If we delay and the Omega disappears with the child, Adrian stepped closer. You say Omega, as if it means stray animal. Celeste's expression hardened. I say Omega because the court will, because the board will, Because every rival family will. You are thinking with guilt, Adrian. And guilt has never preserved a bloodline. Noah is not a bloodline. He is exactly that before he is anything else. Her voice lowered, almost gentle now, which made it crueler. Your father understood this. He would have taken the child home last night. My father ruined everything he touched. He built the chair you sit in. And I decide who leaves this room with power. Adrian turned to Mira. Contact legal. Freeze every action connected to this petition. Revoke Celeste's access to Noah's file and suspend Holt's network privileges pending investigation. For the first time, Celeste's composure cracked. You would turn on family for a janitor. Adrian looked at her then, and there was something devastatingly tired in his eyes. No, I would turn on anyone for using a child as leverage. Mira moved immediately, but legal systems built by families like the Lians did not stop with a single phone call. The petition had not yet reached court, but copies existed. Notices had been printed. A private investigator had already been assigned. Celeste had spent decades ensuring that one person's disapproval could never halt a machine once she set it moving. By the time Adrian reached the clinic, Elias and Noah were gone. Ruth was crying in the waiting room. The treatment bed behind the glass had been stripped. The IV stand stood empty. Noah's bandage wrapper lay in the trash. On the chair where Elias had sat for hours, Adrian found only his coat, folded with painful neatness. He said Noah was scared. Ruth whispered. He said he had to take him home. I thought Mr. Lian. I thought he meant home. Adrian picked up the coat. Its wool had gone cold. For 1 second, the hallway around him disappeared, replaced by another night, years ago, rain on glass. An empty room. The faint indentation of a body on white sheets. The necklace gone from its velvet case. Back then, he had woken furious, humiliated, drugged, convinced he had been used. He had let pride stand where questions should have been, and now the same absence opened before him again. Only this time a child had vanished with it. He sent people to the rented room. Too late. Elias had returned there only long enough to pack what could be carried. The room was smaller than Adrian expected. Though expecting anything felt obscene once he stood inside. A narrow bed pushed against a damp wall. A cracked electric kettle. 2 bowls. Children's clothes folded in a cardboard box. A stack of clinic receipts tied with string. The poverty was not dramatic. It was organized, disciplined, made survivable through relentless care. On the wall above the bed hung Noah's drawings. Adrian looked at them one by one. Buildings, buses, Elias holding a mop, a sea Noah had likely never seen. Then, at the edge of the wall, one picture had been taped lower than the others. 3 figures stood under blue scribbled rain. One was small. One wore a janitor's uniform. The third had no face, only dark hair, a long coat, and silver cufflinks carefully colored at the wrists. Adrian reached toward the drawing but stopped before touching it. Mira stood in the doorway, quieter than usual. We found footage of them leaving through the East bus terminal. Elias paid cash. No destination yet. Keep looking, Adrian said. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. The message contained no greeting. No accusation beyond its existence. Do not look for us. If you ever cared about that night, let us live. Adrian read it once. Then again, outside the cheap apartment window. Rain began falling over the city, thin and soundless against the glass. Adrian stood in the room where his son had slept beside damp walls and second-hand shoes, holding a phone that weighed less than the consequences of his own silence. He did not reply. For the first time in years, he was afraid that any word from him would become another wound. The first file Adrian opened was not a medical record, a security report, or a legal petition. It was a hotel invoice, 6 years old, half corrupted in the accounting archive of the West Pavilion before its renovation. The invoice listed a private charity banquet, 12 executive suites, emergency room service charges, and 1 late-night replacement of damaged terrace locks after a storm. Adrian read the document 3 times without understanding why the ordinary details unsettled him so deeply. Then Mira placed another file beside it, a staff disciplinary report from the same night, signed by a banquet manager who had died 2 years later and countersigned by Director Holt. The report claimed an unidentified Omega had entered the restricted guest wing without authorization. No name, no photograph, no police notice, no follow-up. Only 1 phrase under internal resolution compensation offered. Individual refused contact. Adrian stared at that line until the words stopped sitting still. Refused contact, he said. Mira stood across from him in the archive room, face pale beneath the sterile lights. That was the official note. But there's no payment record, no signed settlement, no identification scan. Whoever wrote this wanted the matter closed without leaving anything useful behind. The old server hummed between them. Outside the narrow archive window, the city had folded itself under rain again, all its glass towers blurred into vertical streaks of light. Adrian had not gone home. Sleep had become an insult. Somewhere beyond the reach of his staff, Elias was moving through the wet streets with a feverish child. Carrying the burden Adrian's family had named a scandal before Adrian had even learned to call it son. Who filed the disciplinary report, he asked. Holt's office uploaded it. Celeste accessed it twice within 24 hours. Adrian's hand rested on the edge of the desk. The knuckles whitened, then eased. Rage was too simple for what moved through him now. Rage still imagined an enemy outside the self. This was worse. This required looking back and seeing not one clean betrayal, but a corridor of small permissions, his suspicion, his silence, his pride, his willingness to accept a story because it protected him from shame. Find the clinic records from that night, he said. Mira hesitated. They were sealed. Unseal them. Legally. Adrian looked up. She stopped, then nodded once. I'll call Dr. Vale. 3 hours later, the truth arrived without drama, which made it more unbearable. The West Pavilion's private physician had kept handwritten notes in a personal archive. Perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of the old habit of doctors who distrusted corporate revisions. 2 patients had been treated anonymously after the banquet, an alpha heir with heat instability induced by an external compound, and an omega guest with suppressant failure after exposure to the same substance. The dosage had not been recreational. It had been deliberate, calculated to create scandal without immediate death. The omega's name had been recorded only once, in pencil beneath the intake sheet. Elias Wen. Adrian sat alone with the scan after Mira left the room. The pencil mark was faint, almost apologetic. He touched the screen as if pressure could make the past clearer. 6 years ago, he had woken in a guest room with a torn memory and a missing necklace, his body raw from the drug's aftermath. His mind flooded with humiliation and suspicion. Holt had told him the omega vanished after being paid. Celeste had advised silence. The board negotiations had continued by noon. He had asked no one whether the omega was safe. That was the fact around which everything else collapsed. Memory returned not as a single revelation but as weather seeping under a door. Elias trembling in the rain. Fingers cold against Adrian's wrist. Elias saying, not seductively, not cunningly, but with terror stripped bare. I don't know what they gave me. Adrian, fevered and barely rational, had believed him for perhaps 1 minute, long enough to draw him away from the banquet hall, long enough to remove his own coat and place it around those shaking shoulders, long enough to fasten the necklace at Elias's throat when the Omega kept clutching at the empty collar of his ruined shirt. Then the next morning, under the clean cruelty of daylight, other voices had explained the night for him. Trap, compensation, ambition, Omega, schemes. Adrian had been young enough to be proud and powerful enough to be believed. He had let anger become memory because anger was easier than helplessness. Elias had not stolen the necklace. Adrian had given it to him, then allowed the world to turn that gift into evidence. His phone rang at 326A. Mr. Lian, Mira said, her voice rough with fatigue. We found a camera hit near South River Station. Elias bought a child's fever patch from a pharmacy at 241. Cash. No hotel registration under his name. But there are 3 cash motels within walking distance. Send the addresses. Already did. Adrian was moving before she finished. Across the city. Elias sat on the edge of a motel bed that sagged toward the center and listened to Noah breathe. The room cost less than a proper meal in Adrian's building. Its wallpaper had yellowed near the ceiling where rainwater once leaked, and the heater rattled like something sick trapped inside the wall. Elias had paid for 1 night using folded bills from his emergency envelope. The man at the front desk had not asked questions after seeing the cash. That was the one mercy of places built for people who did not want to be remembered. Noah slept beneath Elias's coat. Cheeks flushed again despite the fever patch on his forehead. The clinic medicine had helped. Then worn thin beneath fear and travel. Every time the child stirred, his scent flickered. Tiny defensive pulses he tried to swallow even in sleep. Elias sat beside him and rubbed slow circles over his back, whispering nonsense because truth had become too heavy. "It's all right," he murmured. "Daddy's here. The rain will stop. We'll go somewhere quiet." He did not know where. His phone lay on the bedside table with the battery removed. The petition was folded inside his bag beside Noah's birth certificate. 2 changes of clothes, a half-empty bottle of water, and the silver necklace. Noah had cried when Elias removed it. Not loudly, only with the silent grief of a child asked to surrender a comfort he did not understand. Elias had tied it in a handkerchief and hidden it at the bottom of the bag. Without it, Noah's throat looked bare. Elias pressed his fingers to his own collarbone. 6 years ago, he had woken in the West Pavilion's service stairwell with bruises on his knees. A torn memory. And that necklace beneath his palm. He remembered voices beyond a half-open door while he crouched in shadow. Too dizzy to stand. A trap. Someone had said, "The alpha heir cannot be tied to a nobody, Omega. Give him money. If he refuses, make sure he understands what happens to people who threaten the Lian name." He had not waited to hear more. He had fled into the morning rain with Adrian's scent still clinging to his skin and the necklace burning like a brand at his throat. For months afterward, he hated himself for keeping it. Then Noah was born. Small and furious and alive. And Elias had placed the pendant beside his newborn hand, as if some part of that terrible night could be turned into protection if loved hard enough. A soft knock sounded at the door. Elias stopped breathing. Noah stirred. The knock came again. Not loud. Not official. That made it worse. Elias reached into the bag for the small fruit knife he used to cut Noah's apples. His hand shook around the handle. He stood between the bed and the door. "Who is it?" "A pause." "Elias." Adrian's voice. The knife nearly slipped from his fingers. Noah woke at once. fever-bright eyes blinking toward the door. "Daddy, stay on the bed." Outside, Adrian did not knock again. "No one else is with me." That was the sort of sentence powerful people said when they wanted to sound harmless. Elias's laugh came out thin and broken. "You expect me to believe that?" "No." The answer silenced him. Adrian's voice was lower now, altered by the door between them and the rain beyond the corridor. "I expect you to do what keeps Noah safe. If that means not opening the door, then don't." Elias gripped the knife until his palm hurt. "Then why are you here?" "Because he needs a doctor. I can take care of him." "I know you can." A breath, barely audible. "You have, for 6 years." Elias closed his eyes. The hallway remained quiet. Adrian did not demand entry, did not call him unreasonable, did not speak of bloodline or family rights. Somehow, that restraint made Elias feel more exposed than anger would have. On the bed, Noah began coughing, a small, strained sound that ended in a whimper. Elias turned at once. The child's skin was burning again. The storm outside worsened before dawn. The motel lost power at 4:08. The heater died. Rain hammered the thin windows while water rose along the street below, turning gutters into black streams. Elias wrapped Noah in both coats and carried him down the emergency stairs because waiting for morning felt like gambling with a life he had no right to lose. Adrian was still in the corridor. He had been standing there the whole time. Elias almost hated him for it. The lobby doors opened into wind and rain. South River Road had flooded past the curb. Cars moved slowly through dark water. Headlights smeared across the surface. Elias stepped outside with Noah in his arms, ignoring Adrian's hand when it lifted toward him. "Elias, my car is 2 streets over." "No." "Noah's fever is climbing." I said no. He took 3 steps into the rain before his knee weakened. The world dipped. Noah's weight shifted dangerously in his arms. Adrian caught the child first. Not Elias. Because Noah was what mattered, and because some part of Adrian finally understood the order of Elias's heart. Elias tried to pull Noah back. "Don't touch him." Adrian held Noah with careful, trembling restraint, the boy's burning forehead pressed against his shoulder. And something in the alpha's face broke open so silently it was almost invisible. "He's too hot." Elias swayed. Rain ran down his face. Indistinguishable from anything else he refused to shed. "Give him back." "I will." Adrian looked at him through the rain. "I swear I will. But let me get him warm first." "You swear," Elias whispered. "Your family swore I was a trap. They swore I took money. They swore Noah would be better without me before they even knew his name." Adrian's expression went white beneath the storm-dark streetlight. "I know," he said. Elias stared at him. Adrian shifted Noah securely against one arm and took a step closer, leaving enough space for refusal. His voice had no defense left in it. "I found the records. I know what they gave you. I know what they told me. I know what I chose to believe because it cost me less than looking for you." The rain struck the flooded street around them. Elias's body had begun to fail, but his eyes remained painfully clear. "I should have believed you before I remembered you," Adrian said. The apology was not enough. Nothing could be enough in that moment. But it was the first thing Adrian had given him that did not feel like a command. Elias reached for Noah again and missed. His vision folded inward. The last thing he felt before the world went dark was Adrian's free arm catching him around the waist. Firm but not possessive. Desperate but not cruel. The last thing he heard was Noah, half-conscious against Adrian's shoulder, whispering, "Don't let Daddy fall." When Elias woke, the room was warm. Not motel warm. With rattling pipes and damp sheets, this warmth was quiet. deep, expensive in a way that did not announce itself. Rain moved softly beyond tall windows. A lamp burned near the wall. For several seconds, Elias did not know where he was, only that his body felt too heavy, and his hand had been bandaged where the petition paper had cut his palm. Then he turned his head. Noah slept on a wide sofa beneath a pale blanket. Color returned faintly to his cheeks. Beside him, Adrian sat in a chair pulled close. His suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled to the forearms. Noah's small hand rested in his. Adrian was awake. He did not move when Elias opened his eyes. He only looked at him across the warm, rain-darkened room with an expression too tired to be cold and too careful to be hope. Noah's fingers tightened around Adrian's hand in sleep. Elias stared at them, and for the first time since the white envelope arrived. He did not know whether running would save his son or break him. Elias did not ask where he was until Noah woke. Before that, the room remained suspended in a silence he did not trust. The rain had thinned into a pale morning drizzle beyond the tall windows, turning the city outside into layered grey glass. Somewhere behind a closed door, people moved quietly, too quietly, as if the whole residence had been instructed to breathe around a sleeping child. Elias lay against propped pillows with a blanket over his legs, his body aching with the deep humiliation of being cared for without permission. Across the room, Adrian still sat beside Noah. The alpha's posture had not changed much since Elias opened his eyes. He remained near the sofa, not touching the child except where Noah's hand held two of his fingers in sleep. It would have been easier if Adrian looked triumphant, easier if he stood like a man who had rescued what belonged to him. Instead, fatigue shadowed his face, and his eyes kept returning to Noah with the careful disbelief of someone afraid that looking too greedily might make the child vanish. Noah stirred near 7. His fingers tightened first. Then his lashes fluttered. "Daddy." Elias sat up too quickly. Pain flashed behind his eyes. Adrian released Noah's hand at once and moved back, leaving space before Elias could demand it. The gesture was small, but Elias noticed because he had spent 6 years measuring danger by how quickly adults made room for him to refuse. "I'm here." Elias swung his legs off the bed despite the dizziness. "Don't sit up too fast." Noah blinked, then looked between them. "Did we go to a palace?" Adrian's mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Not quite a smile. Elias reached the sofa and touched Noah's forehead. Warm, but no longer burning. Relief arrived so sharply it hurt. He gathered the child into his arms, careful of the IV bruise, and Noah pressed his face into Elias's chest with a sigh that seemed too old for 6 years. Only then did Elias look around. The room was not ostentatious in the way he expected wealth to be. No gold, no chandeliers, no dramatic display, just dark wood, warm lamps, heavy curtains, and bookshelves arranged with the severity of a person who trusted order more than comfort. That restraint made the luxury worse. Nothing in the room needed to announce its cost because the people who owned it had never imagined being questioned. "Where are we?" Elias asked. "My private residence," Adrian said, "not the Leanne estate." That distinction mattered. Elias hated that he understood it. "Who knows we're here?" "Mira, the doctor, 2 household staff who signed confidentiality agreements before entering." "And your aunt?" "No." Elias almost believed him, which frightened him more than disbelief. Trust did not return as a feeling. It returned as exhaustion, as the absence of any better option, as a child's fever cooling beneath a stranger's roof. Adrian stood. "There is breakfast if Noah can eat. The doctor wants him observed for another day. But no tests without your consent." Elias looked at him sharply. Adrian held the gaze. No tests. He repeated, no family registry, no legal filing, nothing without your signature. The words were too precise to be spontaneous. Elias knew legal language when it was meant to reassure someone poor enough to fear paper. He also knew paper could betray as easily as protect. Why? He asked. Adrian's answer came after a silence. Because I should have said that first. By noon, the documents arrived. Mira brought them in a leather folder and placed them on the low table, then withdrew after giving Elias a look that was neither pity nor curiosity. Elias distrusted her less than the others because she never pretended not to see what was happening. Inside the folder were copies of the frozen custody petition, a restraining directive against unauthorized contact from the Lien Family Trust, a medical consent authorization naming Elias as sole decision-maker, and a notarized statement from Adrian acknowledging Noah as his biological child while waiving any immediate custody claim. Elias read the waiver twice, then a third time, more slowly. Adrian stood by the window with his hands behind his back, as if distance could prove intention. Noah sat at the table eating rice porridge with tiny, cautious bites. He did not understand the papers, but he understood the adults were balancing something fragile over his head, and so he made no noise with his spoon. This says custody remains with me. Elias said, yes, unless I choose otherwise. Yes. You acknowledge him publicly here. To legal authorities first, publicly only if necessary. Elias looked up, and what do you get? Adrian turned from the window. The morning light caught the tired lines at the corners of his eyes. A chance not to become the person you were right to fear. It was not an answer Elias knew how to handle. He would have preferred negotiation, a demand, marriage, residence, a supervised schedule written like a threat in soft language. Those he could fight. This was harder. Adrian had placed power on the table and stepped away from it, leaving Elias to decide whether it was still a weapon. You could take him, Elias said, if you wanted to. Adrian's face did not change, but Noah's spoon stopped. No. Adrian said, with your lawyers, your family, your name, I could start a war over him. Adrian's voice lowered. That is not the same as taking him. Elias stared at the signature on the waiver. Adrian Lien, written in black ink with the clean certainty of a man whose name opened locked doors. Beneath it, Noah's name appeared in formal type, suddenly heavy with lineage. Elias reached across the table and moved Noah's porridge bowl closer, because his hands needed to do something ordinary before fear swallowed him whole. Noah looked at Adrian. Are you my father? The room went still. Elias closed his eyes briefly. He had rehearsed this conversation in dozens of forms, and none of them had included a private residence, legal waivers, and Adrian standing beneath grey morning light with guilt written into the line of his shoulders. There were answers that protected a child by hiding truth, and answers that harmed him by giving too much. Elias had lived between those failures for years. Adrian did not speak first. That, too. Elias noticed. He touched Noah's hair. He is your other parent. Noah considered this. His gaze moved over Adrian with the directness only children could survive. Did you know? Adrian's throat moved once. No. Why? Because adults lied. Because families hid shame. Because pride was cheaper than searching. Because your father was young and powerful and wrong. None of these belonged in a child's breakfast. Adrian crouched, so he was not looking down at him. Because I failed to find out. Noah's small brow furrowed. But now you know. Yes. Are you going to take Daddy away? Adrian looked at Elias. Then back at Noah. No? Promise. I promise. Noah held out his little finger. Adrian stared at it as if offered a contract written in a language older than law. Then he hooked his own finger around Noah's with a solemnity that made Elias turn away. Some tendernesses were too dangerous to witness directly. They entered the heart without permission and began rearranging its defenses. The board meeting took place that afternoon under emergency seal. Elias did not attend, but he watched Adrian leave the residence in a dark coat still faintly damp from the night before. Noah had fallen asleep again, his fever finally easing into ordinary tiredness. At the door, Adrian paused. "If Celeste contacts you, do not respond." Elias sat beside Noah with the legal folder on his lap, still giving orders. Adrian accepted the rebuke without flinching, trying not to, failing in small ways. The honesty was so dry, so unexpectedly human, that Elias almost smiled. He did not let it reach his mouth. "Go handle your family." Adrian looked at him for a moment longer. "They are not yours to endure." Then he left. At Lian Global Holdings, Adrian did not argue with Celeste in private. He walked into the sealed boardroom, placed the custody petition and the frozen authorization logs on the screen, and named everyone who had accessed Noah's file without consent. He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize his outrage. That made it worse for those seated around the table. Adrian had inherited an empire from men who believed cruelty proved authority. He now used that same authority to expose them. "Noah Wen is my son," he said. The words struck the boardroom harder than any accusation. Celeste sat at the far end of the table, expression composed. "Then the family has even greater responsibility. The family has no rights over him. You cannot separate blood from obligation. I can separate a child from people who call possession obligation." A director cleared his throat. "Mr. Lian, the market implications will be handled. The heir issue is not an issue for this board." Celeste's eyes sharpened. "You intend to acknowledge him while leaving him with that Omega with Elias," Adrian said. The correction was quiet. Everyone heard it. By the end of the meeting, Celeste's emergency authority over family legal affairs had been suspended pending internal review. Holt's remaining allies were removed from file access. Mira sent 3 binding notices before the directors left their chairs. Adrian knew this was not victory. Families like his did not lose power in a single afternoon. They withdrew, reformed, and found softer places to cut. When he returned to the residence, evening had settled over the windows. The dining table had been set for 2. Elias sat in the small kitchen adjoining the library, sleeves rolled up, stirring soup in a plain ceramic pot that looked oddly out of place among the expensive appliances. Noah stood on a stool beside him, dropping small pieces of tofu with exaggerated care. The domesticity was so unexpected that Adrian stopped in the doorway. Elias noticed without turning. "The doctor said he should eat something warm." "I have staff." "I know." Elias tasted the soup, frowned, and added salt. "That's why I didn't ask." Noah looked over his shoulder. "Daddy said rich kitchens are confusing." Adrian glanced at the stove controls, then at the row of knives arranged by size. "They are." Noah giggled softly. The sound changed the room. Elias felt it and became quiet. Adrian did not step closer until Noah waved him in with the authority of an invited host. Dinner was awkward. Adrian sat too straight, unsure how to occupy space without dominating it. Noah asked questions between spoonfuls whether Adrian lived alone, whether CEOs had bedtime, whether his car could drive through floods, whether he liked eggs. Adrian answered each one gravely. Elias ate slowly and watched them from behind the steam of his bowl. After dinner, Noah's eyelids began to droop. He leaned against Elias, then looked at Adrian. "Can he stay?" Elias's spoon stopped. The question was not complicated to Noah. Adrian was new, strange, solemn, and warm enough to lower a fever. To Elias, it opened years of fear with one small hand. Letting Adrian stay did not mean forgiveness. It did not mean surrender. It meant accepting that Noah's world had changed, and pretending otherwise would only make the child carry another adult lie. Adrian said nothing. He did not help. He did not plead. Elias stood and took a third bowl from the cabinet. He placed it in the sink beside theirs, then turned off the kitchen light. One night, he said. Noah smiled sleepily. Adrian lowered his eyes. At zet prejudice. Celeste Leanne sat in her private study and watched the first anonymous media post go live. Illegitimate alpha heir, hidden by former janitor Omega, inside Leanne corporate tower. The article used no names at first. It did not need to. It described enough a powerful CEO, a mysterious Omega employee, a secret child, a bloodline dispute. By midnight, edited photographs from the clinic corridor appeared online, blurred but recognizable. By morning, the story would become scandal. By afternoon, Elias Wen would be painted as a manipulative Omega who used a child to climb into wealth. Celeste closed the tablet. If Adrian insisted on making private shame into public defiance, then the world would help him learn the cost. By sunrise, Elias Wen had become a story strangers believed they understood. His name appeared first in the anonymous posts, then beneath blurred photographs taken from the clinic corridor. Former janitor Omega, secret alpha heir, corporate scandal. The phrases multiplied faster than truth ever could. On the residence table, Adrian's tablet lay face down after Elias read only 3 lines. He did not need more. Poverty had taught him the grammar of accusation. People did not have to know him to decide what kind of Omega he was. They needed only a photograph, a child, and a rich man's surname. Noah sat beside him in pajamas, drinking warm milk with both hands around the cup. His fever had finally broken during the night, leaving him pale but alert. He saw the adults' faces and grew quiet in the way children did when they recognized danger without understanding its language. "Did I do something wrong again?" he asked. Elias pulled him close at once. "No." Adrian stood by the window, phone in hand, the city's morning light hard against his profile. When Noah spoke, Adrian turned with the expression of a man who had just heard the one question all his power could not bear. "Noah," he said, crossing the room but stopping before he came too close. "This happened because adults made wrong choices, not because of you." Noah looked at him for a long moment. "Are they going to take Daddy?" "No," Adrian said. The answer was immediate. Elias wished he could trust immediacy. Adrian seemed to understand the doubt, because he did not ask Elias to believe him. He only placed a document folder on the table and slid it across. Already signed, public acknowledgement, custody confirmation, legal protection against family interference, a statement that named Adrian as Noah's father without naming Elias as anything except the child's guardian and the person the Leanne family had failed to protect. "You don't have to appear," Adrian said. "I can handle the press alone." Elias looked at the folder, then at the closed curtains, beyond which reporters had already begun gathering near the gates. Being hidden had once been survival. Now it looked too much like guilt. The world had spent 6 years helping the powerful erase him. If he stayed behind another wall today, the same world would write his silence for him. "I'm going," he said. Adrian's eyes shifted. "You don't owe them your face." "No." Elias touched Noah's hair, smoothing down a stubborn piece near his temple. But Noah cannot learn that safety means disappearing. The press conference took place at noon in the West Hall of Lian Global Holdings, the same building where Elias had once mopped floors after midnight while his son counted ceiling lights from beneath a desk. Security held back the reporters, but noise seeped through every barrier: camera shutters, shouted questions, the hungry vibration of scandal dressed as public concern. Elias stood in a plain, dark coat Mira had found for him. It fit well enough. Noah held his hand on one side. Adrian stood on the other. At the entrance to the hall, Adrian paused. "Where do you want to stand?" It was such a small question. It undid Elias more effectively than any apology. For years, others had placed him where they needed him: in shadows, in service corridors, in rented rooms, in documents as unnamed risk. But now, he asked. Elias looked through the open doors at the long table, the microphones, the cameras waiting to turn his face into evidence. "Beside my son," he said. Adrian nodded. "Then I'll stand where you can see me." They entered together. The hall erupted. Questions struck from every direction. Was the child illegitimate? Had Elias hidden him for money? Would the Lian family claim custody? Did the boy carry the rare alpha marker? Adrian let the noise rise until it exposed itself as ugliness, then lifted one hand. Silence did not fall because people respected him. It fell because money trained rooms before people entered them. "Noah Wen is my biological son," Adrian said. The cameras flashed. "He is also, legally and morally, Elias Wen's child before he is anyone else's heir. Elias Wen has raised him, protected him, and made every decision for his welfare during 6 years in which I failed to know the truth. No member of the Lian family, no board, and no private trust has authority to remove Noah from his guardian." A reporter called out, "Did Mr. Wen conceal the child to gain leverage over you?" Adrian's gaze moved toward the sound. "Mr. Wen concealed the child from people who had already proven willing to destroy him to protect a family reputation." The room stirred. Celeste, watching from a side entrance, went still. Adrian continued, each sentence controlled enough to cut cleanly. 6 years ago, at a private Lian charity event, Elias Wen was harmed by a deliberate scheme meant to compromise me. Internal records were altered afterward. He received no compensation, no apology, and no protection. I will not describe his trauma for public consumption. I will say this clearly: any claim that he approached me for money, status, or advantage is false. Elias's fingers tightened around Noah's. He had not known Adrian would say it like that. Not too much, not too little. Enough to return blame without opening wounds for strangers to inspect. Elias looked at him then, and Adrian did not look back. He faced the cameras because if he looked at Elias, perhaps the room would see too much. Another reporter rose. "Mr. Wen, do you deny using the child to enter the Lian family?" Adrian's expression turned dangerous. But Elias spoke before him. "I never wanted to enter the Lian family," he said. His voice was quiet. The microphones caught it anyway. "I wanted my son to grow up without being treated as property. I worked in this building because I needed rent, medicine, and food. I hid him because every system around us taught me that poor Omegas lose children when powerful families become interested. If that makes me guilty in your eyes, then you may write it. I have been poor long enough to survive strangers being wrong about me." Noah leaned against his side. Elias rested a hand on the child's shoulder, not as display, but because they had both stood too long. Adrian finally looked at him. Something passed between them across the bright, merciless hall. Not forgiveness, not yet love in any easy shape. Recognition. Perhaps the terrible and tender knowledge of having seen the same wound from opposite sides and understood, too late, where the other had been bleeding. The press conference ended without theatrical collapse. There was no single blow that defeated Celeste Liane. No dramatic confession dragged from her lips. Real power did not disappear because truth was spoken once. But by evening, her emergency authority was revoked. Holt was arrested for corporate fraud. The altered records from 6 years ago entered legal review. The custody petition died before reaching a judge. Because Adrian finally used the machinery of silence to protect those it had harmed. Celeste met Elias once before leaving the building. They crossed paths in the private corridor behind the West Hall. Adrian was still speaking with legal counsel. Noah had been taken ahead by Mira for juice and a quiet room. For the first time, Elias faced Celeste without a child behind him or a petition between them. Public sympathy fades. Celeste said, "One day you will understand that bloodlines outlast emotion." Elias was tired, too tired to hate her properly. "No," he said, "bloodlines outlast people who mistake them for love." Her face changed by 1 degree. He walked past her. That night, in Adrian's residence, Elias untied the handkerchief from the bottom of his bag. The silver necklace lay in his palm, dull from years of being touched, carried, hidden, loved against reason. Adrian stood across from him in the library. Noah slept upstairs for the first time without fever. Rain tapped softly against the windows. "This was yours," Elias said. Adrian looked at the necklace for a long time. Then he reached out, took it carefully, and placed it back in Elias's palm. "No," Adrian said, "it was a choice I gave you and then failed to honor." Elias stared at the crescent pendant. "I hated you for years." "I know. I hated that you could continue living in the world that broke me." Adrian's voice was very low. "I wasn't living. I was breathing in rooms that never changed and calling that survival." The rain filled the silence after his words. Elias did not forgive him aloud. Forgiveness, if it came, would be a series of mornings. A door left unlocked. A meal shared without fear. A child laughing before both of them and expecting neither to vanish. Weeks passed, then months. Elias did not move into the Liane estate. He refused 3 properties before choosing a small house near the sea, far enough from the corporate district that the air no longer smelled of glass and traffic. Adrian signed nothing on his behalf. He asked, listened, and learned the discipline of not solving what Elias had not offered him to solve. At first he visited every evening and left before Noah's bedtime. Then Noah began saving him a place at dinner. Then rain came early one night. The roads flooded, and Elias pointed to the guest room without looking at him. One night became many. The house did not heal everything. Some days, Elias still woke before dawn with the old terror in his throat. Some days, Adrian stood too silently in doorways. Trapped in memories, he had no right to ask Elias to comfort. But Noah grew louder. His shoes scattered by the entrance. His drawings covered the refrigerator. His alpha scent settled into childhood instead of fear. On a rainy morning nearly a year later, Noah prepared for his first day at a new school by declaring he was too old for help, then immediately failing to fasten the necklace clasp. Elias watched from the doorway as Adrian knelt in front of him. Adrian bent with absolute concentration over a small silver chain, while Noah complained that the bus would leave without them. Adrian fixed the clasp, then adjusted the collar so the pendant rested safely beneath the shirt. "There," he said, "only for us." Noah grinned. "Only for us." Elias looked at the necklace and felt, for the first time, no sharpness beneath his ribs. It was not proof of abandonment now, not a debt, not a wound, not a relic from a night stolen by other people's cruelty. It was simply silver warmed by a child's skin, carried forward into a morning that smelled of rain and breakfast and the sea. Adrian rose and met Elias's eyes. Neither of them spoke. Noah ran ahead toward the door, shouting for both his parents to hurry. Elias reached for the umbrella. Adrian took Noah's school bag. Outside, rain fell lightly over the path, and the three of them stepped into it together. Not as a family restored to what it should have been, but as one chosen after everything had been lost.